I'm an older parent, right? I'm 44, going 45. I've got a 5 and a 4-year-old. And so I think about just longevity and their ability to have a conversation with me, even like, post death. I think about like the Superman story. If you look at how Superman has landed on this planet and he's still able to have conversations with his father. Right? At the time, that technology was magic. Now that's just a fine-tuned language model, right?
Who says tech can't be human?
What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. If you're tuning in for the first time, you should know that our show is all about exploring the nexus between cybersecurity, technology, and humanity. And through this show, I've spoken to hundreds of cybersecurity practitioners, and the one thing that I think we all have in common is we love to reflect and we love to think about ways that we can up-level oneself, because in this industry, you really have to, otherwise you're going to leave yourself and maybe even your team or your company vulnerable. And I'm sure if you're like me, you're probably at a crossroads right now where you're trying to figure out where to invest your time, investing your time on staying up to date with the news and managing your calendar so you could stay up to date on the news and still do your day job. And probably also finding the ways to reduce the number of clicking in all these different windows. Security practitioners, we have the most windows and a lot of ideas as well. Well, my special guest for today is someone that I would consider to be a superhuman or super saiyan when it comes to productivity and staying up to date on information. They've created a lot of workflows for themselves. And if you're thinking of a productive person in cybersecurity, there should be one name that comes to mind, and that's Pedram Amini. Pedram is a serial entrepreneur that has been part of 4 different exits, one being his company Inquest that was bought by OPSWAT in 2024. And besides being an innovator, Pedram is an author and someone that I consider to be a cybersecurity legend. I have the great honor and privilege of speaking to Pedram a few times a week because we work together on building out the Odin bug bounty program by Mozilla. And Pedram, I can go on and on and on about your accolades for days, but most importantly, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ron, how we doing? Thank you for the warm introduction.
Thank you again for coming on. I want to jump right into the news. It wouldn't be an episode if we didn't cover at least one story or one event in our lives or the lives of others. And Pedram, I thought that this would be a great story to get your reaction to. I have one pulled up here and it's titled, Arizona Laptop Farmer Pleads Guilty for Funneling $17 million to Kim Jong-un. And the article talks about this Arizona woman who created a laptop farm in her home. And what she did with this laptop farm was she helped North Korean citizens pose as fake people in the United States to get a job and ultimately probably send some of that money back to North Korea. She ultimately pleaded guilty after getting caught for running this scheme from 2020 to 2023. And I think this one is interesting. It's interesting because this is insider threat at its finest. Maybe these people are just trying to make a living for themselves and also provide money for the regime. But who knows what these workers were doing inside of their environment, and why did this US woman decide to provide that level of access? Is this something that you think is happening regularly? Is this an article or a news story that you think is newsworthy?
For sure. If you look at like the ways that North Korea makes money, it's a whole bunch. There's a long list of illicit things that they do, right? From like borderline slave labor, where they might send out one family member to go do some work in wherever, and they got to send reparations back, or their family's going to end up tortured. Or if it's stealing Bitcoin, a healthy amount of Bitcoin is stolen by North Korean actors. Whether it's running scams, these are all just in the repertoire of things that the North Koreans are doing since with all the heavy sanctions to get money back into the country. So I'm not surprised to hear that at all. And I know of security companies that have shaken out North Koreans during their interview process. And who's to know? Probably a combination where it's one part, let's just get a guy in there to collect the actual salary. Another part is let's get a guy in there to get the espionage going, right? Like once you're on the inside and you have access to things, a lot less controls, a lot less walls and barriers, much easier to start exfiltrating data. But let me give you this anecdote. We're hiring, the Inquest team at OPSWAT is hiring to expand. And I have seen like junk candidates before, but it is more than half now. At least 60% of the candidates that we see are fake candidates. Like candidates that have a LinkedIn, but the LinkedIn is clearly, it's new, the connection count is low. A lot of them have an Asian face, a white name, so that perhaps those are North Korean characters that later on when they get on a video interview they want to match. But it's unclear what the exact motivation is because the volume is tremendous. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this is also Gen AI spawned, right? It's one of the negative aspects of Gen AI. It's making anyone who has written any kind of detection engineering logic knows that even to this day, catching things like spelling errors and grammar issues is valuable. But that's quickly on the way out the door as the actors start adopting Gen AI to write content that, matches the target, whatever country it is, whatever the dialect is, whatever the normal form is, even whatever the industry is. All right. That's one of the coolest things about Gen AI is, hey, explain this to me in this volume of text with this target audience and from this persona as the source. Like I love having Neil deGrasse Tyson explain physics things to me at the level of a college student, right?
Right.
Like this is one of my prompts. So without a doubt, this is a pervasive issue that people are going to be dealing with, and in the least, it's a major time suck. Mm-hmm. And certainly a challenge now for folks out there is just to funnel out the fake candidates so that we're not wasting time with them. But I'm not surprised to hear it at all. There's tremendous value in getting those kind of insider threats and in pulling the salary.
What's really interesting about this whole piece is if someone were to apply for Hacker Valley and they were truly a North Korean actor and they weren't actually a US employee, I'd have no way to know really, unless they showed me a blatantly fake passport. Because, one of the first things that we do when we take a new job is we got to show our passport or two forms of ID. And the person that's checking that ID is not a bouncer or a TSA agent. They're a regular person like you and I that are just trying to collect some information for documentation. So at best, you'd only know at the end of the year when you're doing your taxes and then the IRS ultimately come back and say, hey, this person that you've employed is not a real person. And that's assuming that they're not using a real identity to collect their paychecks.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, at least from what I've seen, the backstories are kind of limited at the moment. Nothing precludes them from even finding someone in the same way that they found this lady in Arizona and obviously paid her to set up the laptop farm for bouncing through. Nothing precludes them from also finding a developer and be like, hey, let me use your persona. I'm going to apply as you to some jobs. And maybe you're working at Google right now actively. You're also going to get a job remotely at some other company using his credentials, using his background, so that when someone looks up the social media history, the Twitter history, there's a legitimate person behind it. But fortunately, at least the vast majority of these fake personas that I've seen, they kind of stand out.
Yeah.
They lack all the accoutrements of a real person.
Right. One of the things that I think is also going to be developing over time, just like people posing as real US people through social, is deepfakes, whether it be video or audio. What's been your experience so far with deepfakes and using AI to kind of seem like it's you or seem like someone else?
Like you, I've done some nominal tinkering, trying to replicate my own voice for that legacy project that I was talking to you about. It's pretty good, especially if you can get to the point where you're fine tuning. If you have the data, you can do some really interesting, really believable deep fakes. And it is fascinating where this is going to go. What does it even do to industries like OnlyFans, where now it's no longer requires there to be a human behind it? Is this going to
really
destroy that world? Like at some point, the Gen AI will get to that point, right, where you don't need there to be a real world human behind it. Like whatever your heart's content is, whatever conversation you want to have, like what's going to happen to that industry of people basically selling photos of themselves when it can be generated realistically and potentially even from your publicly available social media profile. The world's our oyster. Anyone who has that kind of craving for that kind of content can just generate it. I think the deepfakes are already pretty impressive. Just like the coding business that we were talking about earlier, like they're only getting better. Give it a couple of years, and with nominal capture of, like, you're in trouble, Ron. There's going to be plenty of audio and video content of you for deepfake training.
Yep. I've had some people come on the show and they've used deepfake voices of me, and we've like assessed them, and there's still that uncanny piece to at least voices that you speak to. I think that if you're just listening to a playback, like someone leaves you a voicemail, I think you have a much higher likelihood of falling for that rather than someone calling you and then you interacting back and forth. If you fall for that, you're not trusting your gut at this very moment. On a previous episode, we called my mom. Didn't work. She was immediately skeptical. She's like, why are you like performing? Like, why do you got your podcast voice on? And then I just did it last week to some of my team members with another team member's voice, because like, oh, mine's already been cloned. Let me use someone else's. And we use our COO's voice, and no one fell for it. They said that this sounds like Emily, but it sounds like AI. So I think that we're still transitioning, but I mean, look at where we're at today, where you can at least clone a voice and it sounds close to what someone sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, look at the song generators.
Oh yeah,
I think Sona is one of them. Like it's amazing. It's unbelievable what it can do. And yeah, you're right. Probably the most difficult thing for it is that real time. The speed of being able to both parse it, generate, play it back. There's definitely going to be, and you can put some filler words like whatever, maybe mess around with like disconnectivity or some static to help add to the realism. But give it time, and for sure it's going to reach the point of you will not be able to differentiate it. I wonder if there will be a time where we may even have avatars built into our phones where it's responding to emails, responding to text messages, responding to voice messages, and then bubbling it up to you when it's something that's non-standard, like giving you at the end of the workday, it will show me all the things that it's answered to wife, mother, family, sister, whoever. And then when you think about that, well, both sides may have it. Like we may start getting synopses of conversations that our avatars are having with one another. Now, there's some value to that, because a lot of the things that I might ask you for some piece of information that you yourself don't have to look up and give to me. Your avatar can give it to me.
Right. What time are you available, Ron? Like, boom, avatar.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if we want to, how much time do we spend even calculate what time we're going to have this call together, right?
Yep.
If we just put the avatars in mode, like, hey, figure it out. They talk to each other. If we look at the text message change, it sounds just like us. If either one of us jump in as a human, the other one wouldn't really know it. But at the end of the day, the job gets done.
Exactly.
The time is frozen, the calendar entry is set, and here we are.
I love Calendly. I use HubSpot. I love it for that reason. Like, use this link and work out what time it is. So if you had two agents doing that, I feel like that would be a dream come true.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I can't wait for is something to where I could have a command center for all the chats, like Slack chats, Discord chats, LinkedIn, Twitter. Like, I just want to have I want to see all my threads in one spot and then just kind of take it from there. But I haven't seen anything like that quite yet. Maybe you're onto something.
I've seen two different apps in the past. I tried them both. I killed them both. But yeah, the idea was single pane of glass for all the different chats.
Right.
Because I hear you. I got 12 Slacks, 2 Discords, a Mattermost, a WhatsApp, a Keybase. Like it's a pain. It's a pain to even know where in fact, one of the reasons why I use an app called Rewind.ai. It's doing continuous screen recording. There's an open source equivalent called ScreenPipe. But the whole idea there is if you're getting constant OCR on everything that you're reading, later on, if there's a keyword, I'm like, where was this? Was it in one of my emails? Was it in some text message? Was it in a Slack? it's searching across everything I've seen in my desktop. And that's a tremendous time saver for me. It's just knowing where to go look.
I need to jump in for a second and share some details about a special group that we've created for you, our listeners. We understand the importance of creativity in cybersecurity, and Hacker Valley has created a special Cyber Creators Mastermind. Each month, we meet and discuss how to break down technical concepts through stories, the intricacies and opportunities of using audio and video to highlight what's important in cybersecurity, and we share how you can use content to highlight the hard work that you put into your craft. You can check out the mastermind by visiting hackervalley.com/mastermind. We'd love to help unlock your creative potential and would love to see you there. So tell me a little bit about Chief Scientist at OPSWAT. This is one of the things that we haven't really got to talk about is like, what does that come with? What are your responsibilities now that you're part of the OPSWAT family?
OPSWAT acquired my company, Inquest. We announced it on the first day of Black Hat in 2024. It was a deal that was, kind of in the making, and we had a chance to meet with the leadership team and cross all the T's and dot all the I's and make the announcement then. And I've been a close contact with the OPSWAT team for a long time. The executives, Benny, the founder, Tom Mullen, and a whole bunch of other cast of characters who, through my time at Inquest and even prior with my startup JumpShot, we had relationships with the OPSWAT team. They're one of two vendors on the planet that offer a multi-AV scanning, the other being VirusTotal. And they're really the only ones that offer it on premise. If you want to have a couple dozen AV engines in a box that you're going to scan all your files in, OPSWAT is the name of the game. And so they acquired the company, predominantly for our threat intel capability and for our NDR platform. And throughout the acquisition, both myself and a company founder, Mike Archimone, picked up executive roles. And, really as chief scientist, it's a dream role. The goal of it, at least my current mandate, is to work on machine learning algorithms, AI engines, and we've got a whole slew of models that we're putting together to help the mission at OPSWAT. So that's really the predominant goal of that chief scientist role is building these models. And initially, we'll be leveraging the vast data lake that OPSWAT has built over its 20 years of existence to help produce models. And then we'll take those models and turn it right back on the data and start using it to find some interesting threats. And that's a really exciting thing for me to get into deep research on like real world threats that are happening. And OPSWAT's got a great purview because they protect critical infrastructure. So they're both on the IT side, the OT side, they have cross-domain products. So really the perfect visibility to try and catch, one of my dream technical goals is to be able to find the Stuxnet going in the other direction.
Okay, so like targeting us. So
exactly. Yeah.
Dang. So one of the things that I think people probably don't know about you and Inquest and ultimately how you got over to OPSWAT ultimately is Inquest was bootstrapped. That is something that you don't hear from a lot of companies. You hear like how much money VCs are throwing at these new startups and whatnot. So what was that journey like for you bootstrapping? Because, Hacker Valley's bootstrapped. I run into some of those surprising challenges of like, all right, I have this great idea. How do I build out the team overnight? Well, you got to be a little bit more tactful when it's your money that you're playing with.
Yeah, I'll tell you, then this is my second back-to-back bootstrapped startup. JumpShot previously was a B2C play, and I bootstrapped that with my good friend Dave Endler, who I'd previously worked at the ZDI and BCP. And then, I went straight from there post-acquisition into bootstrapping Inquest. It's tough. One of the things I say now, actually, one of my advice to folks who are looking to start a new company is not to bootstrap. Right? If you have the capability to get a solid MVP, get some design partners, get some revenue, that's awesome. But then before you establish a profit, while there's still a lot of hype to the possibilities, I would go do a capital raise. Because if you don't get on that track, it's very hard to switch from one to the other. And if you start actually having profits, you're going to have a tangible valuation that's different than the kinds of valuation you're going to get when it's just an idea and a dream. So I highly recommend to people to not only consider taking on capital, It allows you to stay in your swim lane. It allows you to hire professionals that can help you in the areas that you're not good at, so they can well round out the company. Like, I'm not sales and marketing, right? Like, I'm in research and development. To have someone in the sales and marketing front would have been a very valuable, value add early on.
I bet.
So I highly recommend this to people. And the thing with startups is you want it to either take off or to fail. And if you're not, when you're bootstrapping, you're kind of slow and simmering. So you're not taking these massive risks. You don't have a big burn. If there's tough times, you can probably do some consulting to keep the business moving forward. But with a VC-backed startup, you're either going to explode on the launch pad or you're going to exit into orbit. And that's really what you want. You want to be able to repeat, rinse, retry until you really get that magic formula to have a huge exit, a huge success.
I agree, especially on the sales point front, because I think a lot of people don't realize how expensive a salesperson is. If you want to get someone that knows how to do their job, like you mentioned, a professional, it's going to cost you a pretty penny, and that's not including all the commission that they're going to expect along the way.
Or the travel and expenses.
Especially.
That's another thing with the sales guys is if they're not making money, it's just an intrinsic loss. At least when you hire a developer, every day that engineer is working for you is value add to the product, right? It's iterating the product. Whereas with the sales team, if they're not making money, that's burned capital that isn't really producing much for it. Sure, they're socializing the product, but it hurts. It hurts to hire a sales guy that's not producing. Whereas hiring any engineer, you're at least getting something added to the bottom line.
Exactly. One of the things that has always been striking to me about you is you like to go superhuman. At the top of the episode, I mentioned that if there's one person that comes to mind for productivity, it should be Pedram. I was speaking to the Attack IQ founder, Stefan, and when we talked about productivity, workflow, and AI, he said, you got to talk to Pedram. So I wanted to ask you, what are the top tools or top AI use cases that you're seeing that are applying to your life and maybe even the work that you do in cybersecurity?
There's a lot. I think my monthly bill on just AI across the various services it's got to be approaching like 500 to somewhere in between the 500 and 1,000 a month. But it's definitely saving me a ton of time as well. Some of the immediate tools that come to mind are Daniel Miesler, who's one of our colleagues, security guy. He put together a tooling called Fabric. You're basically able to take these different language models and interface with them over the command line. So there's a bunch of patterns or prompts that Fabric comes bundled with, and they're all pretty awesome. They're worth reading through. In fact, a lot of my initial knowledge around how to write a good prompt came from just reading through those prompts. Now with the later models, your O1s, reasoning models, it's not as important to be a nuanced prompt engineer, but at least in the earlier days with the GPT 3s and 4s, doing silly things like asking the language model to take a deep breath, take a step back, things that are obviously absurd for a non-organic endpoint, right? But it makes a difference, right? And so learning these tricks, these nuances, really makes a difference in the output. So that's one great tool is Fabric. Another one is Obsidian. I've been an avid GTD note taker my entire career. I was a big user of Evernote. That got pretty stagnant. I started trying different things like Notion had a little bit of a run. But then I landed back on Obsidian, and I've been obsessed with Obsidian. I've got a couple different vaults, one for jujitsu, one for myself. And so that's a lot of Obsidian is just Markdown, right? It's just Markdown on disk. So and it turns out that the language models like to read and talk in Markdown format. So a lot of my inputs and outputs now are Markdown, and I'll use Obsidian as like my home base for all this knowledge. Which then on top of that, within Obsidian, I can get AI as well. There's a whole bunch of plugins, but I really like Copilot. Gives you the ability to do RAG over all of your notes. It can find similar notes. It's pretty good vitality. They're updating it all the time. So that pipeline of ingest through language model, store in Obsidian, use language models to talk to Obsidian, and then if I need to go back to the original source, that has saved me a tremendous amount of time just ingesting all the different sources that I like to ingest to stay on top of the industry.
How would you describe, your process with like getting things done, and what does that mean for you? And what is Obsidian, and how do you exactly use that?
Yeah, Obsidian is a PKM. That's a personal knowledge management system, right? Like if you use Apple Notes, Evernote, BearNote, these are all different examples of personal knowledge management. The beauty of Obsidian is that while the client itself is not open source, and there is desktop, iPad, iPhone, Android, there's multiple types of clients. While it is not open source, the data itself is open. So like the data lives on your system. You can sync it however you want. They do offer you the ability to use their own syncing service at a cost, but otherwise the app is free. There's also a massive community behind Obsidian. There's so many extensions written, like Copilot, for example, to get you to bring your Gen AI into your vault. So that's really the crux of Obsidian. Is it's a beautiful app that makes it very easy for me to ingest notes into it and to take notes while I'm working on a project.
So what about AI and cyber? There's a lot of people that I speak to, at least on the enterprise side, that do not believe that AI writing your code is a good look. But on the other hand, like someone like myself, I don't have a development team behind me. So it's either me or the AI that's going to write it. Where do you fall in the spectrum of like AI being a good look to write, specifically like code that is going to affect other people, or trying to manage that with yourself or your team behind it?
Look, I think at this point in time, if you are a professional or hobbyist developer and are not using Gen AI to produce code, you're missing out. I mean, are you using Google? Are you using Stack Overflow? The answer is handedly yes. And that's what this is, with less keystrokes, right? Instead of you having to go do the research and then go do the Stack Overflow and then do the testing, the language models can go do all of that for you. And if you prompt it well and you force it to create test cases and you have it update your README and commit, make Git commits, you can do a pretty good job in getting things to automate from the ground up. I will say that where we currently stand, ground up projects are pretty great. But if you're trying to get it to hack on existing production code, it's first and foremost, you might start blowing through the context window. I look forward to these things continuing to grow. Secondly, those hallucinations might start creating problems for you at that point. Like, you cannot trust it blindly, but it is great for scaffolding. It is great for getting some raw clay that then you can start, manipulating. And it's just generally great for saving time. Like, I'm not saying start blindly coding, but you should definitely be leveraging it. And it's also under a single pane of glass. Like, you're living inside your IDE, and you can just talk to this assistant who's then also capable of writing code in any single language. Like, I am a native Python developer. I have been for like 10 years. I can code C, C++, PHP, Perl, assembly, blah, blah, blah. But 99% of my preference for manual code writing is Python. But now with Gen AI, I can read and write almost any language. It's some of the syntax and nuances that are pain. But I'll ask it, like, let's write some Go code because that's a better tool for the job. Let's write some Swift code. I want to write a little OCR engine for my Mac that I can take a partial screenshot and get like the text out of it. And so let's write the data view code for Obsidian. And so it's really made me instantly very, very capable in a polyglot environment.
There's a new quote that I think is going to be very famous one day. Maybe it already is now, but AI is not coming for your job. Someone using AI is coming for your job. And I think, to take that quote another layer deep, a company that's using AI is coming for your job. I hear a lot in cyber and other fields, even in the development field, AI can't take my job. We're light years away from that. And I think that there's a possibility that that's true, because people are constantly finding ways to innovate and up-level oneself. But some people are very fine with where their skills are at today. And I think that people like that, it's just a matter of time till companies or individuals learn your trade craft and ultimately start to automate it bit by bit. And I think we're seeing that a bit with AI right now. Like some of the developers that I follow on YouTube, they first start by having the AI to create a plan. Some people use this tool called Aider for developing architecture plans. And then they'll go to another tool like Klein to start doing the software engineering components. But when there's a project manager that comes into play in this workflow, game over. I think everything changes, and it's all about how well you are at articulating what you want. And that's going to be the product of how good something is as a result.
Even then on the articulation front, like when you use Rue and you're talking to it, right from VS Code, as you're talking to it, there's a quick button you press that's a magic button that improves what you're saying.
Oh,
right. It's going to I may type, and this is one of the things I've just started doing is again with Mac Whisper, because I've got like a single keystroke to start speaking, and then Mac Whisper, which is really good speech to text. So I will go to Rue code. I will push and hold my FN button. I'll speak a little bit, and like it might be mumbly or back and forth or whatever. Then I'll just hit that magic button, and it completely changed into something that is well suited. And then I hit go, and off, it's off to the races. So there is even the articulation process is getting made easier for you. Like you don't need to do as much prompt engineering anymore with these later greater models, the O1s and O3s. But yeah, it's a fascinating space. It's definitely getting more and more excited. And to the people who think it's not going to take their jobs, I'd love to ask those people how they feel about the truck driver who says the same thing. Right. And most of them, I think, will be like, oh, yeah, they're silly. Right. The self-driving trucks are coming. I'm like, OK, you're the truck driver, just in a different subject matter. It hurts to know or to think that you're replaceable in that sense. But that's the reality. Now, at the same time, this should free us up to do more interesting things. Right. In the same way that, when we went from like a punch card to an assembler, from assembler to like a compiled language, from compiled to interpreted, from there to like the drag and drop, again, the replets and the gradios, this isn't taking away, net jobs. It's creating more, actually. Like when PHP came out, that was probably one of the biggest explosions in suddenly the number of developers, the volume of developers that were out there.
Yep.
Because the tooling should enable that. So, I expect us to have a lot more capable developers, and then we can start thinking about larger scale things. Now, there is a window to this. One of my, when I think about just startups in general, I feel like there's a great window of opportunity right now where if you have the unfair advantage of if you can adopt this tooling, you're going to be able to build things faster, cheaper. Yep. Kind of like if you're an early adopter of Amazon Cloud. My prior startup to Inquest, JumpShot, we launched that in 2010. That was the first time I had, hands-on experience with Amazon. There's no way we could have done that bootstrap without Amazon.
Right.
I would have had to have bought servers, which required investment. I would have had to hire people to manage those servers. Instead, we had this entire ecosystem in the cloud. And oh, by the way, they're so excited to get you in there that it's really cheap and free up until a certain amount. They're really helping you. They're not going to nickel and dime you and start bleeding you from the beginning. They want you to get to a critical mass so that you can then afford to pay them, $50,000, $200,000 a month to build up to it. So it was really conducive to startups explosion. And I think that's the same thing that's going on now. But I do think that at some point, yeah, you're going to have a couple of companies, probably someone like Microsoft, who's sitting on not just decades of internal code, but they own GitHub, right? They've got Copilot, they've got the investment in OpenAI. Like they're sitting on a pretty novel chunk of data. They're probably going to be able to, they'll be slower than everybody else, but fast forward 10 years, and you're probably going to be really hard pressed to compete with a couple of major players who can just do this really well.
Exactly.
Probably the roboticized workforce is going to look like that as well. Like there will be a whole bunch of players, and then one or two, major players that have the dominance in the industry are going to get established.
I think what you're doing with Obsidian is the smartest thing that you could do. Gary Vee says that, AI can write all of your social posts, but the one thing it can't do is replace your experience. So the fact that you are categorizing all of your knowledge and knowledge from other sources and putting that all into one place gives you the ability, as tech grows, to ask it more complicated questions. I've been recording every call, like every work call, since 2023. And right now I don't have a way to connect all of that connective tissue, all of the context for every single conversation, like see how conversations from 2025 relate to the 2023 ones yet. But by having the data, as the technology evolves, I'll be able to ask it that information later.
Yeah, that you're touching on another thing that I really want. I'm an older parent, right? I'm 44, going 45. I've got a 5 and a 4-year-old, and so I think about just longevity and their ability to have a conversation with me, even like post death.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go back and I think about like the Superman story. If you look at how Superman has landed on this planet, and he's still able to have like conversations with his father. Right. At the time, that technology was magic. Now that's just a fine-tuned language model, right? You can use text GAN to copy the tone of how you speak. You can use voice cloning to copy the actual sounds of how you speak. So if you can capture enough data, and if you can codify your like beliefs, your philosophies, all down into some LLM ingestible form, you're going to be able to produce an avatar that even long after I'm gone, if my daughter has a question about child rearing and I'm long past, she might be able to get an answer that is close, if not identical, to what living Pedram would have told her.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I've started capturing as well. Unfortunately, most of my content is technical, so I need to find a way to start recording non-technical content to feed the data coffers that way as well.
Yeah.
But that's one of my longer-term Gen AI project goals is to leave an avatar behind.
I love that. Pedram, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day and also some time away from Obsidian. I know that this is going to make its way into your Obsidian anyways, but for anyone that doesn't follow Pedram, be sure to check out the show notes or description wherever you're listening or watching. And with that, we will see everyone next time.